The morning air was cold and quiet. The sky was pale gray, and the street looked tired, just like the people walking on it. Cars moved past with soft noise, and footsteps filled the sidewalk. In front of a small grocery store, a young woman sat on the ground with her back against the wall. She kept her knees pulled close to her chest to stay warm. A thin jacket covered her shoulders, but it was not enough to stop the chill. In her hands was a small piece of cardboard. The words written on it were simple. They said she needed help. The letters were uneven, but clear. She did not hold it high. She kept it close to her lap, as if she was afraid to ask too much. People walked past her all the time. Some looked at her for a second and then turned their heads away. Some stared at their phones. Others stepped around her like she was part of the sidewalk. A few whispered to each other. A few shook their heads. No one stopped. She did not blame them. After sitting there for many days, she had learned something. Most people were not cruel. They were just busy, tired, or afraid to get involved. Still, it hurt. Every time someone passed by without looking, it felt like a small cut inside her chest. She was not always like this. There was a time when she woke up in a warm room, made coffee, and went to work. There was a time when she had a place to keep her things, a bed to sleep in, and a door she could lock. Now she had none of that. Now she had a small bag beside her, with a few clothes and some old papers that she kept folded again and again. The ground was hard. She could feel every crack through her thin pants. Sometimes she tried to sit on a piece of cardboard or newspaper, but those were hard to find. When it rained, everything got wet, and when it was cold, her bones ached. But she stayed there because it was one of the few places where people passed by all day. Somewhere in her heart, she still believed that one of them might stop. A small child walked by with a parent. The child looked at her and tugged on the adult's sleeve. The adult pulled the child along faster. The child kept looking back, but they were soon gone. That moment stayed with her. It was not anger she felt. It was sadness. She wondered what the child saw. Maybe the child saw a woman who looked tired. Maybe the child saw someone who needed help. Children often notice things adults tried to ignore. A bus stopped nearby. A group of people got off, laughing and talking. They walked past her. Their shoes were clean. Their coats were thick. Some of them smelled like soap and perfume. It reminded her of how she used to smell when she went to work in the morning. Clean, ready, normal. Now she smelled like the street. She knew it. She tried her best to stay clean, washing in public restrooms when she could, but it was never enough. The smell stuck to her clothes, her hair, and her skin. She looked down at her hands. They were red and dry. Small cuts marked her fingers. She used to have neat hands. Now they told a story of cold, dirt, and hard days. Every few minutes she shifted her body to ease the pain in her back. Sitting for hours made everything stiff. Still, she did not stand up. If she stood up, people might think she did not really need help. Sitting made her look small. She hoped that might bring kindness. A man in a long coat walked past and dropped a few coins into her cup without looking at her. She whispered a soft thank you, even though he was already gone. The sound of the coins was light, but it meant food later. It meant she would not go to bed completely hungry. She wondered where he was going. Maybe to work. Maybe home. She tried not to imagine too much. Thinking about other people's warm homes made the cold feel worse. The day moved slowly. The sky stayed gray. The store door opened and closed again and again. People bought food, drinks, and snacks. Some of that food ended up in the trash later. She knew this because sometimes she checked. It was not something she liked to do, but hunger was stronger than pride. Her stomach made a low sound. She placed her hand on it and took a slow breath. She tried to stay calm. Panic did not help. She had learned that too. A woman with a bag of groceries stopped for a moment. She looked at the cardboard sign, then at her face. For a second, hope rose inside her. But the woman shook her head and walked away. Maybe she had no money left. Maybe she was in a hurry. The reason did not matter. The result was the same. The young woman felt something heavy inside her chest. It was not just hunger. It was the feeling of being unseen. It was like shouting in a room where no one could hear. She lowered her eyes and stared at the ground. The cracks in the pavement formed strange shapes. Sometimes she made pictures out of them to pass the time. A face, a bird, a road. Anything to keep her mind busy. She remembered how she had ended up here. It did not happen in one day. It happened slowly, like a rope pulling tighter. First, she lost her job when the place she worked closed down. Then she used her small savings to pay rent. She thought she would find new work soon. But weeks passed and nothing came. Bills grew. The landlord stopped being patient. When she had to leave her room, she thought it would only be for a short time. She told herself she would stay with someone or find a new place fast. But things do not always go as planned. One door closed, then another. Now she was here. She did not tell this story to people on the street. Most of them did not ask. Most of them did not want to know. They saw a person sitting on the ground and made up their own story. Some thought she was lazy. Some thought she was dangerous. Some thought she was not worth their time. If they had known the truth, would it have changed anything? She did not know. A cold wind passed through the street. She pulled her jacket closer. Her lips were dry. Her eyes burned a little. She blinked to keep tears away. Crying in public was not something she'd like to do. It made people even more uncomfortable. Still, there were moments when she wanted to cry so badly. Not because of the cold or the hunger, but because she felt alone in a crowd. So many people, yet no one with her. A man selling newspapers walked by and called out his words. His voice was loud and full of life. She envied that. She had not spoken loudly in a long time. Most of her words were soft now. Soft thank you. Soft, excuse me. Soft sorry. She wondered if she would ever be able to speak strongly again. The sun moved behind clouds. It was hard to tell what time it was. Her phone had died days ago, and she had no way to charge it. Time had become a guess. She watched people go into the store. Some came out with coffee. Some came out with bread. The smell of warm food drifted into the air. It made her stomach hurt more. A group of teens laughed as they passed by. One of them glanced at her and said something quietly to the others. They laughed again. She pretended not to hear. She pretended not to care. But it stayed with her. She wanted to stand up and tell them that she was just a person, that she was not a joke. But she stayed silent. Silence had become her shield. The cup in front of her had a few coins. Not much, but something. She counted them in her mind. Maybe it would be enough for a small sandwich later. Maybe a warm drink. That thought kept her going. As the day went on, her body felt heavier. Her shoulders drooped. Her eyes grew tired. Still, she stayed. People kept walking. The world kept moving, and almost no one stopped. To most of them, she was just another face on the street. Another story they did not want to hear. Another problem they hoped would go away if they looked somewhere else. But she was still there, holding her small sign, sitting against the cold wall, waiting for someone to see her, waiting for someone to care. And even though it did not look like it, even though it felt like no one ever would, a small piece of hope still lived inside her, because without that hope, she would have nothing at all. The young woman wrapped her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders as she sat against the wall. The cold was biting, but it was not the only thing that hurt. What hurt the most was the memory of how her life had come to this point. She closed her eyes for a moment and let herself remember. Even though remembering made her chest ache. Not long ago, she had a small apartment, just enough for herself. It was not fancy, but it was safe, and it was hers. She had a job at a small office, working with numbers and papers. Her coworkers were kind enough, and her boss trusted her to handle important tasks. She had a routine, and routines give people a sense of control. She liked control. She liked knowing that she could plan her day and see it unfold without surprises. But life does not always go as planned. One morning, she received a call that would change everything. The company had lost a big client, and they were forced to close several departments. She was among those who would lose their jobs. She tried not to panic. She told herself it was temporary. She would find another job. She had skills. She could work hard. She could start again. But the weeks turned into months. Every interview she went to ended with polite rejection. "We will call you," they said. But they never called. She began to feel invisible, like her skills and efforts did not matter at all. At first, she could still pay rent. She had some savings, and she used them carefully. She skipped small luxuries and ate very little. She hoped to save enough to last until she found a job. But life had a way of testing her patience. Her apartment required repairs she could not afford. The heater broke during the cold nights. The landlord stopped answering her calls. Soon, eviction notices arrived. She packed what she could, and with a heavy heart, she left the place she had called home. She had a few friends. She thought they would help, but some were busy with their own lives. Others felt awkward or afraid to take her in. One by one, they made excuses. She did not blame them completely. It was hard to help someone when your own life was full of challenges. Still, the sense of being abandoned left a mark deep inside her. She walked the streets with her small bag, trying to find places to rest, places to sleep, places to feel safe. Her first nights on the street were the hardest. The cold pierced her body, and fear filled her mind. She learned quickly that some places were dangerous, and some people were not kind. She learned to stay quiet, to keep her eyes down, to avoid drawing attention. She did not want trouble. She only wanted survival. Food was another challenge. She tried to find leftover meals from cafes or restaurants, but it was never enough. Hunger became her constant companion. It was not just the empty stomach that hurt, but the feeling of powerlessness. She had been independent once, someone who could make her own way in the world. Now, she depended on the generosity of strangers. And that felt strange and uncomfortable. The streets were not easy to navigate. Some nights it rained heavily, and she had no umbrella or jacket that could keep her dry. The wetness seeped into her bones, and she shivered uncontrollably. Other nights were bitterly cold, and she would wrap herself in layers of old clothes she found or was given. Sometimes she slept under bridges or in quiet corners. Every shadow became a small shelter. Every noise became a warning. She thought a lot about her family. She had distant relatives, but she could not ask them for help. They lived far away, and their own lives were complicated. She did not want to be a burden. She had always believed in solving her own problems. Now she realized that sometimes life was too heavy for one person to carry alone. Even during those difficult days, she held on to small routines. She would wake up early, find a safe corner, and make herself presentable with what little she had. She would walk the streets, hoping someone might notice her sign. She counted the coins in her cup, tried to stretch them as far as possible, and reminded herself to survive. There were moments of kindness that gave her small sparks of hope. Once, a man gave her a sandwich and a bottle of water. He smiled at her and said, "You're strong. Keep going." That simple sentence stayed with her for hours. Another time, a young woman handed her a scarf and said, "I know it's cold. Stay warm." Those moments reminded her that not everyone ignored people in need. Some still cared. Some still saw her. But the majority of people passed by without noticing. Some stared for a moment, then looked away. Some whispered behind their hands. Some avoided her entirely. It made her feel invisible. It made her question her worth. She wondered if people could see her as more than just a homeless girl on the street. Could they see the person she really was? Could they see the years of effort, the dreams, the heartache? She also thought about the things she used to dream about. She had wanted a simple life, a job she enjoyed, friends to share meals with, a small home with warm lights in the evening. She had wanted to travel, to learn new things, to feel safe and cared for. None of those dreams seemed possible now. Not yet. But she did not give up completely. Giving up felt like dying slowly. She knew that survival required more than waiting. It required careful thought, patience, and courage. Every day she survived. Every day she stayed on the streets. She grew stronger in ways she did not fully understand. She learned how to read people. She learned how to find safe places. She learned how to make small gestures to protect herself. She learned resilience. Even in the hardest moments, she tried to remember that her life was not over. The world had been harsh, but there were still kind people. There were still chances for things to change. She carried that hope quietly, like a fragile flame inside her chest. She could not let it go out. She thought about the day ahead. What would happen today? Would someone notice her sign? Would someone offer a warm meal or a small word of kindness? She did not expect miracles. She expected small gestures, moments of care, moments that could remind her that humanity still existed. The sun peeked out briefly from behind the clouds. Its light touched her face, warming her skin for a moment. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The warmth reminded her of simpler times. She remembered mornings in her small apartment, sunlight spilling through the window, and the quiet sound of the city waking up. That memory felt distant, but comforting. She opened her eyes and looked at the people walking past. Their lives seemed so orderly, so predictable. They had homes, jobs, families, routines. She wondered if they noticed how easy it was for someone to disappear in plain sight. She wondered if they realized that sometimes people needed help more than anything else. Even as doubt and fear pressed against her heart, she kept her small hope alive, knew that life could be cruel, but it could also surprise you. It's a kind of surprise that could change everything, the kind that could give someone like her a second chance. She had experienced enough pain to understand that hope was not a luxury. It was survival. And so, she stayed. She stayed despite the hunger, the cold, the loneliness. She stayed because she believed that one day someone would see her. Someone would care. Someone would reach out and change her life, even if just a little. Every face that passed was a question. Every coin dropped in her cup was a small answer. She did not know when the turning point would come, but she knew it could. Somewhere out there, someone was capable of kindness. Somewhere out there, someone could change the course of her story. She wrapped her jacket tighter once again and adjusted the small cardboard sign on her lap. The wind whispered through the streets and she listened, hoping that it carried more. Then cold air, hoping it carried the promise of help, of understanding, of a life that could once again be warm, safe, and whole. She did not move. She did not speak. She simply waited, quietly, patiently, believing in the possibility that the world might not be as cruel as it had seemed. When in that waiting, she held on to the strength that had brought her this far, the courage that had kept her alive, and the fragile, enduring hope that one day everything could change. The day started like any other. The young woman sat against the cold wall, her thin jacket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her cardboard sign rested on her lap. She watched the people pass by, some hurried, some distracted, some barely noticing she existed at all. She tried not to hope too much. Hope had hurt her before. It had given her dreams that life refused to fulfill. But even so, she carried a small, fragile spark of it inside. She had been sitting there for hours when she noticed someone stopping a few feet away. It was unusual. People rarely stopped. Most walked past quickly, ignoring her presence completely. But this person stood still. At first, she thought it was another passerby who was about to glance and keep moving. She lowered her eyes, expecting disappointment. But this person did not move. They crouched down a little, making themselves level with her eyes. Their gaze was not curious or judging. It was gentle, calm, full of attention. The young woman's heart beat faster. She had not been looked at like this in a long time. Most people's eyes passed over her, seeing only a figure on the sidewalk. This person's eyes saw her. "Hi," the person said softly. "Are you okay?" She hesitated. Her voice had grown soft and cautious after so many days on the street. She had learned to speak only when necessary. I'm fine," she said quietly, almost whispering. "No, you're not," the person replied gently, as if they understood. "Do you need help?" Her heart skipped. It was strange to hear those words. Strange and unfamiliar. She wanted to say yes, but pride and fear held her back. She had been hurt before by promises of help that never came. She had learned to survive on her own, even when the world seemed cold and uncaring. The person did not push. They simply sat down on the sidewalk nearby, close enough to offer comfort, but not so close as to invade her space. They smiled in a way that was kind, not pitying. "I don't have a lot of time," they said softly, "but I want to help if I can." Can we talk for a few minutes? She looked at them, unsure. Something in their voice was different. Something real. Something human. She nodded slowly. They spoke for a while. The young woman told pieces of her story, carefully, in small fragments. She told about losing her job, about struggling to pay rent, about the nights spent on the street. She told about hunger and cold, about being invisible to the world. Each word was heavy, but the person listened without interruption. They did not look away. They did not judge. They simply listened. For the first time in months, the young woman felt relief in speaking. It's not the relief of having a solution, but the relief of being heard. The person nodded and occasionally asked gentle questions. Not too many, not probing, just enough to show that they cared. When she finished a story about a particularly hard night, the person reached into their bag and handed her a small package. Inside was a sandwich, a bottle of water, and a warm scarf. The young woman's hands trembled as she took it. She had not eaten properly in days. The scarf was soft and smelled faintly of soap. It was more than just warmth. It was proof that someone had thought about her, cared about her comfort. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice shook. She was not used to this level of attention or kindness. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," the person replied. "Just take it one step at a time. You deserve to be treated well. You deserve to be safe." Those words sank deep into her heart. She had heard phrases like that before, but from strangers they often felt empty. This time, they felt real. They felt like a lifeline. Over the next few hours, the person helped her in small ways. They made a phone call for her, trying to find shelters or services where she could get help. They offered advice about where she could find a warm place to rest for the night. They even helped her clean her face and hands with wet wipes, offering gentle encouragement. The young woman could hardly believe it. This was not a world she was used to. She had learned to survive alone, to expect nothing, to keep hope locked inside her chest. And yet here was someone offering help freely, not judging, not questioning her worth, just helping because it was the right thing to do. As the day turned into evening, the sun started to dip behind buildings, and the cold returned. The young woman shivered in her thin jacket, but the scarf wrapped around her neck kept her warmer than she had been in weeks. She looked at the person who had helped her and felt a mix of gratitude, disbelief, and a fragile sense of hope. Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked softly. "I'll be around," the person replied with a small smile. "I can't promise every day, but I will check in, and we'll see what we can do together." The young woman nodded. She did not expect miracles. She knew that one person could not solve all her problems. But this small act of care reminded her that she was not completely alone. That in itself was powerful. That night she found a quiet corner to sleep in. She held the scarf close, feeling its warmth, and thought about the day. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine a small possibility of change. Maybe things could get better. Maybe someone could help. Maybe she did not have to survive completely alone. The next day, as promised, the person returned. This time, they brought more than food. They brought information about local organizations that help people in her situation. They spoke with her patiently about filling out applications, about medical checkups, about shelters where she could stay temporarily. The young woman listened, taking it all in slowly. Every word felt heavy with possibility. It was overwhelming, but not in the way fear overwhelms. This was different. This was hope mixed with action. Every step she had been taking alone now had someone walking beside her. She realized that help did not always come as a big, sudden change. Sometimes it came as small, consistent acts of care. Someone noticing you, someone listening, someone offering a hand, not demanding anything in return. Days passed, and the young woman began to notice small differences in her life. People at the local shelters recognized her, offered smiles, remembered her name. Volunteers helped her find warm meals, clean clothes, and places to rest. It was not perfect, but it was a start. She could feel life returning to her body, hope returning to her mind. She still struggled. The streets had taught her how harsh life could be. Fear lingered. Hunger sometimes returned. Cold sometimes bit through her layers. But she had learned a powerful lesson that people were capable of kindness, and that kindness could arrive in the most unexpected moments. One afternoon, she was walking toward a shelter when a young boy handed her a small bag with cookies. His mother nodded at her kindly from behind, and the young woman smiled at them both. She realized something important. Acts of kindness were not always big. They could be small, simple gestures that built up over time, and each one mattered. That evening, she sat quietly in the shelter, reflecting on how her life had changed in just a few days. One person had noticed her. One person had spoken to her, had listened, had acted. That one act had set a chain reaction in motion. She was no longer invisible. She was being seen, being cared for, and slowly, she was being given back her life. She thought about the people who had ignored her before. She did not feel anger toward them anymore. They had their own lives, their own struggles. She only felt grateful for the person who had stopped, the person who had decided to help when no one else would. That person had reminded her of something she had almost forgotten, that the world could still hold goodness, and that she was not beyond hope. By the end of the week, the young woman had taken her first small steps toward stability. She had a warm place to sleep, food to eat, and people willing to help her navigate the next steps. She had learned that accepting help was not weakness. It was strength. It was courage. It was the first act of taking her life back from the streets. And though the road ahead would still be long and difficult, she now knew she did not have to walk it alone. Someone had seen her when everyone else had looked away, and that act of seeing had changed everything. It was a reminder that one person's kindness, one moment of attention, could ripple outward and begin to heal even the most broken parts of a life. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to dream. Not wild, impossible dreams, just small, tangible ones. A warm bed every night. Enough food? A job she could return to. A life where she could wake up and feel safe. It felt distant, but it also felt possible. And that possibility made her heart lighter, her steps firmer, and her hope stronger than it had been in a very long time. The young woman woke up to the soft sound of people moving around the shelter. The warmth of the room wrapped around her like a blanket, and for the first time in months, she felt safe. She stretched her arms and took a deep breath, feeling the comfort of having a roof over her head. Life had been harsh, but now she could finally begin to rest, even if only for a little while. She remembered the first person who had stopped for her, the one who had spoken gently and listened without judgment. That single act had started a chain of kindness that was growing every day. Today, she was no longer alone. Volunteers at the shelter knew her by name. They offered smiles, warm meals, and quiet words of encouragement. It was different from the street, where people ignored her existence. Here, she felt seen. She felt human again. The young woman spent the morning sitting by the window, watching people go about their day. She had a small notebook where she wrote her thoughts. Writing had become a way to calm herself, to process her feelings, and to remember the moments of hope she now had. She wrote about the warmth of the blankets, the taste of fresh bread, and the smiles she had received. These were small things, but they mattered. They reminded her that life could be kind. A volunteer named someone she didn't know approached her with a gentle smile. They handed her a paper and a pen and said, "Here, you can write your story. Share it if you want." "People want to hear it," the young woman hesitated. Her story was painful, full of hunger, cold nights, and loneliness. But maybe sharing it could help her, and maybe it could help others understand. She took the paper and started to write slowly, carefully, word by word. Hours passed. People came and went. Some stayed to help with chores around the shelter, some helped prepare food, and some simply spent time talking to those who lived there. The young woman began to notice the quiet rhythms of kindness. Each act, small or large, seemed to ripple out and touch someone else. The world felt lighter, even though she knew it was still full of challenges as the day went on. A small group of people stopped by. They had heard about her situation through the first person who had helped her. They brought warm clothes, blankets, and bags of groceries. Her hands shook as she received them. She had never imagined that so many strangers would care so much. Each gift felt like a message. You are not invisible. You are not alone. They spoke kindly, asking questions about her life and her dreams. She told them a little, careful not to overwhelm herself. She shared how difficult it had been to survive on the streets, how lonely it felt when no one noticed her, and how grateful she was for the help she had received. The people nodded, listening with patience and compassion. Some offered advice, others offered practical help, and all offered kindness. In the evening, the young woman sat quietly in the corner of the room, feeling the weight of the day. So many people had reached out to her, and it felt overwhelming in the best way possible. She realized that help could come from many directions, and that sometimes when one person started, others followed. It was like a small fire spreading. One spark could light a path for many. That night, she was assigned a small room where she could sleep alone. It was simple, with a bed and a small lamp. But it was hers for the night. She lay down feeling the softness of the blanket and thought about the people who had helped her. Strangers who had become friends. People who had decided to care when no one else would. She closed her eyes and let herself feel safe for the first time in a long while. The following days were filled with small victories. She visited a medical clinic with the help of a volunteer. The doctor treated her cold sores and dry skin, gave her vitamins, and spoke to her with kindness. She had not seen a doctor in months, and it felt good to be treated as a human being rather than a problem. She also began to apply for jobs again, this time with guidance from the volunteers. They helped her write a resume, practice interviews, and find places that were willing to give her a chance. Each application sent out felt like a small step toward reclaiming her life. Even if rejections came, she knew she had a support system that would help her keep going. One afternoon, she met a woman who had been through a similar experience. They shared stories and fears, and the young woman realized she was not alone in her struggles. Many people had faced hardships, but kindness and support had helped them rebuild their lives. Hearing that gave her courage. She could do it too. She could rise again. Word of her story began to spread quietly among the local community. People brought donations, offered job leads, and sometimes just stopped to talk with her. Each encounter strengthened her confidence. She started to believe that she could trust people again, that not everyone would turn away, that there were still good hearts in the world. She started volunteering small tasks at the shelter as a way to give back. It made her feel useful and part of something bigger. She helped organize meals, handed out supplies, and even listened to other people's stories. Each time she helped, she felt a little stronger. She realized that receiving help was important, but giving help in return brought a new kind of healing. The young woman's days began to feel more structured. She had a place to eat, a place to sleep, and people she could count on. She could take showers, rest without fear, and plan her future slowly but surely. The streets were still a part of her memory, but they no longer defined her present. She was moving forward, one day at a time. One day. She received a call from a local organization that offered temporary housing and training programs for people in her situation. She was nervous but excited. With the guidance of the volunteers who had supported her, she filled out the forms and prepared for an interview. For the first time in months, she felt like she had options. Like life was opening doors instead of closing them. As she walked to the interview, she remembered the first person who had stopped for her on the street. Without that single act of noticing her, she might still be alone, invisible, and struggling to survive. Now she had warmth, support, and opportunities. She had hope. The interview went well. She spoke honestly about her experience and about her desire to work hard and rebuild her life. The staff listened attentively, impressed by her determination and honesty. By the end of the day, she was offered a place in the program, where she could stay safely while receiving training for a new job. Tears filled her eyes as she walked back to the shelter. She had not cried in front of anyone for fear of being judged or ignored. But now, these tears were different. They were tears of relief, hope, and gratitude. She had survived so much, and now she was beginning to thrive. That night, She wrote in her notebook, recording the events of the day. She wrote about the people who had helped her, the kindness she had received,
Yes.
and the small victories that were slowly reshaping her life. Writing helped her make sense of her feelings and reminded her of how far she had come. Days turned into weeks. The young woman settled into the program, learning skills and gaining confidence. She met other people who had faced challenges and were now rebuilding their lives. Sharing stories and supporting each other created a sense of community she had never experienced before. It was not perfect, but it was real. It was human. It was healing. She started to dream more boldly. She imagined finding a stable job, moving into her own small apartment, and reconnecting with the world she had been forced to leave behind. She still carried memories of hunger, cold nights, and loneliness, but they no longer defined her. She had survived them, and now she was building something new. Her story began to inspire others. Volunteers shared her journey with the community, showing how one act of kindness had created a ripple effect that changed a life. People who had once ignored her were now learning from her experience. Understanding the importance of noticing those in need, the young woman never forgot the first person who had stopped and spoken to her gently on the street. That moment had been the turning point. Without it, she might still be sitting alone, invisible, and hopeless. Instead, she had warmth, support, and the beginnings of a new life. She realized that help could come from unexpected places. Strangers could become friends. Small gestures could create big changes. And most importantly, kindness could spread, one person at a time, changing not just one life, but many. By the end of the month, she was walking through the streets, not as a girl invisible to the world, but as someone seen, cared for, and slowly reclaiming her life. People who passed by now smiled at her. Recognizing her presence and the courage it had taken to survive, she carried the lessons of the street with her. But she also carried the lessons of kindness, hope, and community. She knew life would still have challenges, but she was no longer alone. She had learned to accept help, to trust, and to give back. Each day was a step forward, and each step was powered by the kindness of people who had chosen to care. And in that new life, she finally understood that one person noticing you, one person caring, could change everything. It could start a chain of support that lifted someone from despair to hope, from loneliness to community, from fear to strength. She had experienced it firsthand. And now she was living proof that kindness mattered, that people mattered, and that life could change in ways you never imagined. The young woman woke up to the soft morning light streaming through the small window of her temporary room. For the first time in months, she did not wake up to cold or fear. She stretched her arms, feeling the warmth of the blankets and the safety of four walls around her. She had a place to stay, people who cared for her, and hope growing quietly in her heart. She sat on the edge of the bed and thought about how far she had come. The streets had seemed endless, filled with cold nights, hunger, and the crushing weight of being invisible. Yet now, she was slowly reclaiming her life. The path had been difficult, and there were still challenges ahead. But she had learned something invaluable. No matter how dark life could seem, a single act of kindness could create a ripple that changed everything. Her days were now filled with purpose. She attended a training program designed to help people find work, learn new skills, and regain independence. The instructors were patient and understanding. They taught not only practical skills, but also confidence, patience, and resilience. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was building something that could last, something that could carry her beyond the hardships of her past. She spent her mornings in workshops, learning computer skills and practical tools for the workplace. In the afternoons, she volunteered at the same shelter that had welcomed her. Helping others who were facing situations like hers, she listened to their stories, offered encouragement, and shared what she had learned. Each smile she received, each word of thanks, reinforced the idea that she could give back, that she could be part of something larger than herself. One day, while walking back from the training center, she passed by the streets where she had once sat alone with her cardboard sign. The sight of the familiar sidewalks, the corners where she had spent countless cold nights, brought tears to her eyes. She remembered the fear, the loneliness, and the quiet despair that had once consumed her. But she also remembered the first person who had stopped, the person who had chosen to care, and how that one act had changed everything. She paused for a moment, taking it all in. Life had shifted slowly and steadily. She had started as someone invisible, ignored by the world, and now she was part of a community, building skills, helping others, and planning for a future that felt possible. The contrast was staggering, and it reminded her of the strength she had carried inside all along. Even when she did not know it herself, her confidence grew with each passing day. She began applying for jobs with the help of the volunteers, sending resumes and preparing for interviews. The process was nerve-wracking, but she approached it with determination. She knew rejection might come, but she also knew that persistence and patience were keys to success. She was learning to believe in herself again. A few weeks later, she received her first job offer. It was not a high-paying position, but it was a start, a way to regain independence, to contribute to society, and feel the dignity of earning her own living. She could not help but smile as she held the letter in her hands. The journey from the streets to this point had been long, painful, and filled with uncertainty, but she had made it. On her first day at work, she walked into the office with a mix of excitement and nervousness. Her clothes were neat, her hair tidy, and her heart full of hope. She introduced herself to her coworkers, who greeted her warmly. The office smelled clean and professional, a stark contrast to the streets where she had spent so much time. Yet instead of fear, she felt a quiet confidence. She had survived worse. She could do this. Her life outside work was still healing. She had applied for a small apartment through a housing program and was awaiting approval. The thought of having her own space, a bed to sleep in, a place to store her things safely, filled her with a sense of relief and joy she had not felt in years. It was more than just a roof. It was a symbol of stability, independence, new beginnings. She continued to volunteer in her spare time, helping those still struggling on the streets. She knew the pain of hunger, cold, and invisibility, and she wanted to offer the same small acts of kindness that had changed her life. She would hand out food, offer warm clothes, and most importantly, listen. She understood the power of being heard, having someone acknowledge your existence and your struggle. One evening, she received a call that her apartment application had been approved. Tears filled her eyes as she listened. The place was small but cozy, with a single bedroom and a tiny kitchen. She could finally call a place home again. Packing her few belongings, she felt a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. She had dreamed of this moment for months, and now it was real. Moving into her new apartment, she took the time to make it feel like her own. She placed a small lamp by the bed, folded her clothes neatly, and arranged the few possessions she had managed to keep. It was not much, but it was hers. She could lock the door and know that no one could take her safety away. For the first time in a long while, she felt peace. Her days became more structured and hopeful. She woke up early, prepared for work, and returned home to a quiet, safe space. She cooked simple meals, arranged her belongings, and allowed herself moments of reflection. She thought often about the journey that had brought her here, the streets, the cold, the loneliness, and how a single act of kindness had ignited a chain reaction that carried her to this new life. She stayed in touch with the first person who had helped her, the one who had chosen to notice her when everyone else looked away. Their guidance, support, and friendship had been invaluable. They reminded her to be patient, to accept help, and to give back when possible. She knew she would never forget the moment her life began to change, and she carried gratitude in her heart for that person's compassion. Months passed. She settled fully into her new life. Her job provided stability and a sense of purpose. She was able to save a little money each month, slowly rebuilding financial security. She had a place to rest, a community of friends and supporters, and the confidence to face challenges with resilience. Her story had shifted from survival to growth, from despair to hope. She also began sharing her story publicly, speaking to small groups about her experiences and the importance of kindness and community support. Her story resonated deeply with others. People listened with empathy, Many moved to take action themselves. Some volunteered, some donated, and some simply learned to notice those in need around them. Her life had become not only her own, but also a source of inspiration and change for others. Through it all, she never forgot the lessons of the streets. She remembered the hunger, the cold, the long hours of waiting and hoping. Those memories grounded her, reminding her of the value of compassion and the fragility of life for those struggling in silence. She understood that kindness, no matter how small, could ripple outward and transform lives in ways that could never be measured. Her apartment became more than just a shelter. It became a place of reflection, creativity, and growth. She decorated it simply with items that reminded her of hope, resilience, and human connection. Each morning, she woke with gratitude. Each evening, she rested with peace. The trauma of the past did not vanish, but it no longer dictated her present. She was free to live, to thrive, to dream. Friends and supporters from the shelter and her training program became part of her extended family. She celebrated small victories with them, completing projects, earning praise at work, saving money, and finding joy in simple routines. Life had become layered with human connection, warmth, and purpose. The things she had once feared were gone forever. She also began planning for the future. She dreamed of moving into a slightly larger apartment one day, of traveling, and of continuing to help others in similar situations. She imagined starting a small program to support people who had been homeless, to guide them through the transition from survival to stability. These dreams felt tangible now, achievable through determination and support. Every time she walked through the city streets, she noticed small acts of kindness around her, the shopkeeper who smiled at a tired delivery person, the passerby who handed a hot drink to someone on the sidewalk, the volunteers quietly helping those in need. She understood that the world contained both hardship and goodness, and that human connection could bridge the gap. Her journey from the streets to stability became a story she carried proudly, not as a tale of shame or suffering, but as proof of resilience, hope, and the transformative power of kindness. She had been invisible once, ignored by the world, but now she was seen, valued, and thriving. One quiet evening, she sat by her small window, looking out at the city lights. The memories of the cold streets, the hunger, and the loneliness surfaced briefly, but they were no longer painful. They were reminders of how far she had come, how much she had endured, and how many people had touched her life along the way. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for the help she had received, but for the strength she had discovered within herself. She had become someone who could face the future with courage. She had become someone who could give back, who could notice, who could act when others were in need. Her life had changed because one person had chosen to see her, and that choice had set off a ripple that transformed everything. Now, she was living proof that hope could survive even in the darkest moments. That one act of kindness could spark a chain reaction, changing not just one life, but many. That even when the world seemed cruel and indifferent, there were people willing to care, to act, to love, and she carried that knowledge in every step she took, in every smile she offered, in every act of kindness she could share. She had been invisible once, but no longer. She had been alone once, but no longer. She had been hopeless once, but no longer. Her life was now a story of resilience, human connection, and the quiet, enduring power of compassion. It was a story she would carry with her always. A story that reminded her and others that even in the darkest times, change is possible, kindness matters, and hope can be found in the most unexpected places. The young woman closed her eyes for a moment, feeling peace settle over her. The streets were behind her. Hunger and fear were behind her. What lay ahead was a future built not only on survival, but on growth, purpose, and connection. And she knew, with certainty, that her life would continue to be a testament to the power of noticing, caring, and acting, proving that even when everyone thinks no one will help, they can be very, very wrong.